Structure of temples. Many worship services and rites among the Orthodox Old Believers Inglings are mainly held in temples, sacred groves, shrines, fortified settlements, hermitages and cloisters, as well as outside of temples, in ritual gatherings, at burial sites, in ancestral valleys, in sacred groves and oak forests, along the banks of sacred rivers and bodies of water, or near the funeral pyre of Croda. All divine services and hymns are performed by the clergy of the Old Faith, Yngling priests, Copen Yngling priests, confessors, sorcerers, wizards, templars, strainics, elders and community elders, or wise elders. In terms of architectural appearance and purpose, the temple structures of the Orthodox Old Believers Inglings vary. The Temple of Light is a white temple. It has the shape of a pyramid and is intended for the lives of priestesses who assist women during childbirth and for the observation and upbringing of infants in the event of the mother's death during labor. Such young children are cared for by the attentive priestesses in the Temple of Light until they are 3 years old. After this period, the child is taken by the father or a representative of the family line if the child's father has died defending the fatherland. In mountainous areas, natural passages in cave mountains were used for the Temple of Light, which were expanded, deepened, fortified, and decorated. The Spirit Temple, a 9-petal flower, transforms spirits for new life in Asvarga. The upper. It is intended for the spiritual transformation of a person during the transition to a new spiritual life in Asvarga. The higher temple is the Temple of the Four Gates, has the shape of a pentagon. It is intended for worship services in honor of the great Triglav of the world of reveal and the one heavenly God creator, the ancestor rod, as well as in honor of the 4 ancient clans of the great race, the Daorians, the Horians, the Rassians and the Sviatorusians. The 5-gate temple, also known as the Temple of the 5 Gates, has a rectangular shape. The temple has 3 entrances on the south and 1 on the west and east. The sacred grove of lineage or Temple of Life, Heavenly Rod. In mountains, caves were the Temple of Rod, like the Temple of Light. Life, it is dedicated to the Heavenly Rod. In mountainous areas, natural passages and caves were used for the Temple of Rod, similar to the Temple of Light. 4 entrances were gated and led to a large hall for worship services honoring God Rod. The 5th entrance, Oven Ra, was a special system for orphan children to undergo initiation rites. The Temple of Perun, or Temple of Semyevrab, is octagonal and aligned with cardinal directions. The 5th gate leading to the Temple of Rod was the Furnace of Ra, that is, a special system through which orphan children who were undergoing the rite of initiation to the ancient gods entered the Temple of Rod. The Temple of Perun, known as the Temple of Semyevrab, is shaped like an octagon, oriented according to the cardinal directions. It is intended for worship services in honor of Perun and the heavenly gods who protect the Slavic Aryan peoples. The Temple of Perun had 9 sanctuary halls where worship services were held for the bright gods. It is intended for worship services in honor of Perun and the heavenly gods who protect the Slavic Aryan peoples. The Temple of Perun had 9 sanctuary halls where worship services were held for the bright gods. 8 sanctuary halls were arranged around the 9th, which was dedicated to the supreme god Perun, whose idol was located right in the center of the sacred grove. Above each sanctuary hall, there was a bell tower topped with a dome-shaped tent, and these dome tents were different, each with unique shapes. The design and appearance of the Temple of Perun were used by the builder when constructing the 9-dome Cathedral of St. Basil in Moscow. The Temple of Ingli, known as the Temple of the 9 Gates, was shaped like a 9-pointed star of Ingli. Inside it, regardless of the size of the temple, there is a distance of 3.9 fathoms, which is 57.6 meters. There were 15 Haroman structures arranged in the shape of a large circle, known as the Great Kola. This Great Kola was a powerful fortification and was used in ancient times as a fortress wall. In addition to the 15 Haroman structures, there were the Great Gates located on the southern side of the Great Circle. These temples are considered the most important sacred groves by the Orthodox Old Believers Inglings, as they house 2 temples, one above the other. The upper temple was called the Heavenly Sacred Grove, while the lower temple was the Sanctuary of Ingli. All worship services and ancient rituals of the Old Faith were conducted at the Temple of Ingli. In the Heavenly Sacred Grove, worship services were conducted by 4 supreme priests: Dia, the priest of Vorog, the priest of Perun, the priest of Indra, and the priest of Erila the sun. In the sanctuary of Ingli, worship services were conducted by 4 supreme priests and a priestess: the priest of Quartz, the priest of Are, the priest of Varuna, the priest of Tribog, and the priestess of Don Mertsana. On the sacred grounds opposite each corner of the temple of Ingli, at a distance of 9 fathoms, which is 19.2 meters, there were fiery altars of Dunya. Next to each fiery altar was the idol of the patron god for the Slavic Aryan week. The priests and priestesses maintained the fire in the altars. The priests and priestess from the heavenly sacred grove and the sanctuary of Ingli maintained the fire in the altars of the gods they served. The great temple of Ingli was in Asgard Iri, where the rivers Belovodje, Iri, Irtish, and Ami met until 1530 AD. It had 3 upper temples stacked, and below was the Ostovnica, an underground sanctuary for ancient rites. From the Ostovnica, passages spread beneath the rivers Iri and On, and beyond Asgard Iri. The great temple of Ingli had 3 upper temples, which were arranged one above the other, and beneath the original temple was the Ostovnica, an underground sanctuary of the sacred fire, which served as the 4th temple where ancient rites and sacred rituals took place. From the Ostovnica of the great temple of Ingli, multi-level underground passages branched out in different directions, running not only beneath the rivers Iri and On, but also extending beyond Asgard Iri. In addition, the Ostovnica housed sacred repositories of offerings and gifts, as well as stores of great wisdom. Above the Ostovnica were the following temples. The lower sanctuary, the original sacred grove, was intended for conducting burial rites, triznas, pre-birth rituals, reminations, and remitations, which involved various spiritual rituals and initiations. The upper sanctuary, the middle sacred grove, had 16 outer walls arranged in a circle, resembling the circle of Svarog. In the central hall, all daily rituals and worship services were conducted. In the 16 halls adjoining the central one, services and feasts were held in honor of the supreme god, the patron of that hall. All daily rituals and services were performed in the central hall. In the 16 halls adjoining the central one, services and feasts were held in honor of the supreme god, the patron of that hall. The heavenly sacred grove had outer walls shaped like a 9-pointed star of Ingli, with the angle of each pair of outer walls equal to 36 parts of a large circle, or 90 degrees. An 18-sided dome tent with 9 towers was crowned in the heavenly sacred grove, positioned opposite each pair of shining facets of the dome tent. In the heavenly sacred grove, great festive worship services and weddings were held, conducted by 12 supreme priests, the Diya, from all 4 temples of the great temple of Ingli. Note: Di is the high priest, possessing the ancient wisdom of the gods. Each Diya in the great sanctuary of Ingli had his own throne, and a fiery altar where he offered bloodless sacrifices, gifts, and offerings. The ancient mysteries of the Tree of Worlds were performed by 9 Ds from the upper sanctuaries. Surrounding the great sanctuary of Ingli were temple structures arranged in a circle, forming an outer wall, 9 fathoms wide, 19.2 meters, and 2 fathoms high, 68.38 meters long. Outer walls, 213.36 cm thick, and distance between Ural stone blocks of the Great Kola was max 0.69 mm, 58.28 meters. The outer walls were built 213.36 cm thick, and the distance between the blocks of Ural stone from which the Great Kola was built did not exceed one line of 0.69 mm, 0.69 mm, 0.69 mmV. Between the Great Kolo and the temple complex, there were 4 stairways shaped like the swastika symbol of the Wheel of Life, allowing the faithful to access the heavenly sanctuary from the inner courtyard and the upper level of the Great Kolo. The entrance to the temple complex through the gates in the Great Kolo was only from the southern side, facing the Om River via a descending bridge, as there was a deep moat with water surrounding the Great Kolo. At the Great Kolo, beautiful idols of the Svarosh circle gods stood atop the temple ring. The temple, built from Ural stone, reached 711.2 meters high. Often called Little Asgard, the sanctuary was revered. The entire temple complex was built from Ural stone and had a height from the lower mark of the Ostovnitsa to the top of the dome tent of 1,000 arshins, 701.2 meters. Often, The Orthodox Old Believers Inglings called the entire temple complex the Little Asgard, the City of Gods, and the Great Temple of Inglia itself, Alatra Mountain. Dee's sanctuary, the Temple of the Ancestors, has a round shape, symbolizing the eternity of life of our wise ancestors in the halls of the worlds of glory and prav. These temples were erected near graveyards, ancestral valleys, and also at battle sites. Next to the sanctuaries creds were set up. Dee's sanctuary was dedicated to all our wise forebears and was intended for conducting rituals of mourning and memorial services in honor of the great ancestors of our clans and the entire heavenly kin. The sanctuaries of Veda, temples of wisdom, took various forms and were meant for understanding the ancient wisdom of the gods and the wisdom of our great ancestors. In addition, there are the sanctuaries of Veda dedicated to some bright celestial god. In them, besides the understanding of the ancient wisdom of the gods and the forebears, rituals of worship are performed, for example, the active sanctuaries of the Veda of Perun in the city of Omsk, the Schitual Sanctuary, the Shermni Temple. It has various forms. Shermni temples, built of stone or clay, house recluses serving gods. Nearby sanctuaries care for children, led by priestesses Egini Matushka, also called Baba Yaga, where the recluses who have turned away from worldly life live, having fulfilled their duty to their kin and decided to dedicate themselves to the service of the heavenly gods, enlightened individuals who have chosen to devote the rest of their lives to godly deeds. Typically, in the sanctuaries near the hermitages, children from ancient clans living in the area, as well as orphans, were raised. These orphans were brought to the hermitages by highly initiated and life-experienced priestesses known as the Egini Matushka, who were also called by the name of the goddess they served, Baba Yaga. In addition, there are separate active sanctuaries and shrines in the hermitages. A skit is an interforest settlement of the great race with a sanctuary, a temple where representatives of Slavic and Aryan clans live. Life in the hermitages was spent in constructive communal work. In the sanctuaries, worship services and bloodless sacrifices were performed. The skit, uniting representatives of ancient clans, was a unique embodiment of a unified communal community of the great race, helping the last representatives of the ancient clans survive in difficult times while adhering to the old faith of their forebears, yngliizm. The Veles sanctuary, the Temple of Veles, had a quadrangular cross shape resembling a Celtic cross. The Veles sanctuary was built only from trees of sacred species, cedar or oak. Each tree was carefully selected before construction, dried out, exposed to the sun for a long time, and then smoked with the incense of fragrant herbs. Each inner wall of the sanctuary was oriented according to the cardinal directions. The sanctuary was crowned with a large octagonal domed tent set on a bell tower. The Veles sanctuary had 3 sacred entrances: the western entrance of the ancestors, the southern ceremonial entrance, and the eastern entrance of Erila the sun. The sanctuaries dedicated to other heavenly gods had their own unique forms, but the internal arrangement of the sanctuaries was similar. An exception to the general rules is the Veles sanctuary, which has a special internal layout. For example, we can look at the overall structure of the Ingli sanctuary. Inside the Ingli sanctuary, there are 3 parts: the entrance of Veles, the central sanctuary, and Asgard. At the entrance of Veles is the place where, in ancient times, the newly summoned would stand, coming to honor their ancestors or preparing for the consecration of the old Orthodox faith of the Ingli. For according to the holy tradition of our ancient faith, the supreme god Veles stands at the heavenly gates, the pure Svarog. Beyond the heavenly gates are the paths leading to Irisad and the halls of Volkala, where the heavenly Iri flows. Near the sacred Asgard of the heavens, the supreme god Veles lets through the heavenly gates only righteous people, who end up in the abodes of the bright heavenly gods, where after their obvious life on Midgard earth, our ancestors rest and watch how we live and create for the benefit of our ancient families. The Central Sanctuary. The Central Sanctuary is where all the old Yngling elders gather, glorifying right and glory, offering glory to the gods and the wise ancestors of the clan, descendants presenting gifts to heavenly gods, for salvation from the flood, blessing and resettlement from Daria to Rosenia. In the center, a 9-pointed star of Ingli, called Roseni, symbolizes the 9 paths of settlement. To the Mother of the Heavens and the heavenly clan, for salvation from the great flood, for the blessing and resettlement of the clans of the great race, from Daria to Rosenia. In the center of the central sanctuary, there is an elevation in the shape of a 9-pointed star of Ingli, which is called Roseni, or it symbolizes the 9 paths along which the race was settled. On it, the clergy, the Yngling priests, the Yngling Kopens, or the Volks or spiritual guides, gather. They read the sacred writings and traditions of Santhya and Karati. They bless the betrothed couples for the sacred family union. They raise glory to the great lineage through the parent, the heavenly patron gods, to all the Dorian and Korean clans, the clans of the Rossens and the Sviatorus, of the races united into the great race and the entire heavenly lineage. After the services, the Orthodox Old Believers of the Ingli exit the sanctuary through different gates. This ancient ritual symbolizes the resettlement of the clans of the great race from the land of Sviatoras, from Belovodje, along 9 paths, into free, uninhabited, yet blessed lands. Asgard is the most important northern part of all the temples. This is a sacred place. It is separated from the central sanctuary by a wall. Above the central gates, a vivid event from the glorious past of Midgard is depicted, as told in the sacred Santis or Karatis. Along the wall stand idols, statues of the bright gods and the wise ancestors, and images depicting them hang. In Asgard, a sacred service is held, and bloodless offerings are made on the sacred stone Alatar, the altar that stands before the central gates. Not far from the sacred stone is the altar throne, on which the sacred offerings are placed. In the Asgard wall, there are 3 gates. The central gates are called the Daryan, because our ancestors came from the sacred land of Darya. And then, along the stone belt, the isthmus between the eastern and western seas, crossed into the territory of the land of Sviatoras, Belovodje, and further populated and settled the vast expanses of Rosinia. The gates that are to the left of the Daryan gates are called the Western or Venetsky gates, while those to the right of the Daryan gates are called the Eastern or Aryan gates. Between the Venetsky and Daryan gates, an idol is placed, a statue of the god Veles, and on the wall, the god Veles is depicted, guarding the path and the gates of Svarog, leading to Iri and heavenly Asgard. On the other side, between the Daryan and Aryan gates, an idol of the god Perun is placed. And on the wall, the great Asa is depicted, the heavenly battle of the gods, where the god Perun and other bright gods defeat the forces of darkness. From the Daryan gates to Rasania, there is a bridge that symbolizes the stone belt, the Ripi mountains, the Ural, the isthmus between the western and eastern seas, and along it stand standards, banners, and flags of the bright forces of the heavenly lineage. On the eastern side, there is an elevation, called an island, where singers and bards are located. For it is said in the sacred tradition that in the eastern ocean, on the island of Buyan, stands the holy city of Asgard, and it is washed by 2 sacred rivers, Iri and Omi, and the beautiful singing can be heard far beyond the borders of this city, soothing the souls, granting strength, and glorifying the gods. In addition, shrines were established for the ancient heavenly gods in the blooming valleys and on the hills, and idol houses with fiery altars were built. Over time, some sanctuaries and idol houses were surrounded by a stone fence or palisade. Such sacred places came to be called city mounts. The paths that led the Orthodox Old Believer Inglians to the ancient sanctuaries, idol houses, and city mounts were lined with stones along the edges. These paths were not straight, they spiraled, creating a special spiritual atmosphere. Often skoofs were located nearby. The settlement of the Slavo-Aryan tribes of the Great Race, without a shrine, but next to a fortified area where rituals, services, and bloodless offerings take place, scoffs were also set up near the sacred groves and oak forests. Sacred groves and oak forests are especially revered places where festive services, rituals, and ceremonies are held, where a believer can connect with Mother Nature and receive life forces, joy, and purity. It is a misconception that the Slavic Aryan peoples had no temples. All sacred rites and ancient rituals took place in sacred groves and oak forests. However, the Slavic Aryan peoples have had many diverse temples. Read the structure that all sacred rites and ancient rituals took place only in open spaces in sacred groves and oak forests. We declare that the Slavic Aryan peoples have had many diverse temples, idol houses, sanctuaries, and other cult structures since ancient times, where they conducted worship and performed various rituals. And the rituals of the ancient gods' priests, even from the descriptions in ancient chronicles, it is clear that these temples were mostly built of wood on elevated areas or in sacred groves and oak forests. And nearby, there were enclosures surrounded by a fence, which had powerful gates fortified against various enemies and Tatars. Temple interiors were divided into sections from a few to many, with some having just an entrance and sanctuary. From 3 at the entrance of Veles, the central sanctuary, and Asgard in the idol house of Yngliia, to 16, the idol house of Svarog in Vendagard, and sometimes even more, from 72, the idol house of the tribes in the Erie Highlands, to 144, the great idol house of Yngliia in Erie Asgard. There were temples where the interior was divided into 2 parts, the front part at the entrance and the sanctuary, which was separated by curtains made of carpets and fabrics, attached to columns and hanging down to the ground. Behind these curtains stood the main idol, in honor of whom the temple was built, and around it were the idols of other ancient gods, adorned in helmets and armor. The idols were made of wood, painted with gold and silver decorations, and cast from copper or noble metals. The temple idols varied in size, from small ones measuring 71.12 cm to large ones that were 3 sajen or 6.4 meters tall, which were placed in the sanctuary, 12 or 100 cm, up to the great 3 sajen ones, 6.4 meters, which were placed in the sanctuary. In the sanctuary, sacred items were placed. Entrances adjoined on 3 sides, east, west, and south, as the north is sacred for all tribes. Temple walls had images and ornaments with patterns. The front sections at the entrance adjoined the sanctuary on 3 sides, the eastern, western, and southern, because the northern side is sacred for all tribes of the great race. Temple walls and sanctuaries were adorned with carved images and protective ornaments in interlacing patterns. Some temples used pillars and fabrics with sacred images. The height of any temple or sanctuary should be at least 16 arshins. In some temples, they placed pillars and hung fabrics with sacred images. Other buildings near the temples housed priests, sacred horses, and stored sacred coverings, military trophies, and offerings to the ancient gods. The height of any temple, idol house, or sanctuary, even the smallest one, should not be less than 16 arshins. Next to the temples, there were other buildings for the priests' living quarters, for keeping sacred horses, and for storing sacred coverings, military trophies, and offerings dedicated to the ancient gods. On the temple grounds there were fire altars, diuni. Next to the idol of the ancient god, there was a large communal bell, as well as long tables and benches for second meals, family or public gatherings, and festive feasts. When laying the foundation of the temple, idol house, or sanctuary, the chosen place was cleansed with fire and water. At the foundation of the temple, which was located in the center, they laid a sacred black sphere, symbolizing the mother of raw earth. Right above the spot where the sacred black sphere was laid, there should be a bell tower and the peak of the main large dome tent. Above the sacred temple entrances, small dome tents and bell towers were often installed, as the complete cycle of worship according to the ancient Daurian calendar of the god can only take place in temples, idol houses, or sanctuaries that have at least 3 dome tents. The residential buildings near the temple, as well as the homes of the parishioners and the communal dwellings, were constructed in such a way that their height did not exceed 2/3 of the height of the temple, idol house, or sanctuary. It was believed that if someone built their dwelling higher than the abode of the gods, they would not experience happiness in their life, but only misfortune and hot troubles. For the ancient gods do not tolerate such human vices as pride, arrogance, and haughtiness,